Ida was 20 years old, and Alberto was 24 when they got married. However, they had been living together for a year before that. When Ida became pregnant, Alberto proposed to her. At first, he tried to talk and hinted that they hadn't really lived for themselves yet, and they could wait with having the baby. But Ida took a stand and explained the obvious to her beloved: whether Alberto liked it or not, she would give birth. And nobody was dragging him forcibly to marry her. Realizing that he couldn't get out of it, Alberto proposed. They've been married for several years. Alberto didn't hold himself back in his interactions with other women. He flirted at work and with his friends' wives. Ida paid no attention to his behavior. Alberto didn't cross any boundaries of what was allowed. Although sometimes she felt very ashamed in front of acquaintances because of his actions. But one incident finally got to her. At a party at their friend's place, Ida caught him kissing an unmarried friend of the hostess during the celebration. She caused a scene, dragged the friend by the hair in front of bewildered friends, but her husband said that he was tired of her, that they rushed into marriage, and he would have never married her if she hadn't gotten pregnant. And now he wanted freedom because he hadn't sowed his oats yet. At that time, their son Pancho was 3 years old. His words shocked not only Ida but everyone around them. Seeing regret in their friend's eyes, Ida naturally burst into tears. She wished her husband good luck in his personal life, despite her friend's claims that Alberto had just had too many drinks. He would sleep it off, come to his senses, and take his words back. In the middle of the party, she left in tears. The next day, Alberto packed up his things and moved to a rental apartment. 3 months later, they got divorced. "Hello, son," Alberto greeted his son, extending his hand for a handshake. After a firm handshake, the father lifted his son up and kissed him. "I've missed you so much. You've grown. You'll catch up to Daddy soon," Alberto said, holding Pancho close to him, laughing. They haven't lived together with Ida for almost 3 years. But despite past grievances, they were able to maintain a good relationship for their son. There were even occasions when, with a hint of irony, they sincerely laughed and recalled the years they had spent together during joint celebrations. "Pancho, be careful, don't strangle Daddy with your hugs," Ida said, smiling, as she approached her ex-husband. "Hello," she greeted, handing him a bag. "There are warm clothes just in case. Toys. Well, you're the dad, you'll figure it out yourself," she hurriedly listed. "Call me if you need something," Ida said as she was running off. "I thought you might want to come with us," Alberto said in surprise. Ida stopped and quickly shook her head, smirking. "I can't. Wish Melania a happy birthday. There's a present in the bag. Pancho knows everything. Have a good time. I allow you to eat my piece of cake," Ida waved to them. As soon as the car disappeared from sight, Alberto looked at his happy son and felt an unfamiliar sense of worry for the first time. Nothing unusual seemed to have happened. It was just that his ex-wife, for some reason, couldn't join them at the countryside to celebrate her former mother-in-law's birthday. But a premonition arose in his heart that something important, something most precious, had been taken away from Alberto, and perhaps he would never get it back. "Well, son, your mom didn't want to come with us, huh? We'll go without her. Grandma will be disappointed, of course. But it's okay. She'll get over it. She'll celebrate her 52nd birthday without her beloved daughter-in-law." Pancho sighed heavily and looked sadly at the dust that hadn't settled yet from his beloved mother's departing car. "Marcelo didn't let her go. I heard them talking yesterday. Marcelo said there was no need to visit his former mother-in-law. And if he finds out she went but won't see him anymore," Pancho paused for a moment, then decided to express his point of view. "They'll probably get married soon." Alberto frowned slightly. The worm of jealousy stirred unpleasantly. Doubt scratched at his chest from the left side. "What do you mean, get married? Does Marcelo live with you?" Alberto mumbled in a hoarse voice, trying to control the anger he felt toward this unexpected rival. "No, he doesn't live with us. But he comes over often. He brings flowers and cakes. Alberto remembered how rushed his ex-wife had been, as if she was afraid she might change her mind and disobey Marcelo. It all became clear to him. She got rid of their son and would spend a romantic evening, smoothly turning into a passionate night. This thought completely spoiled his mood. Flashes of jealousy didn't leave him for a single minute. How could this happen? Alberto had decided to talk to Aida today. To apologize. She had been alone for so long. She dedicated all her free time to Pancho. Alberto was sure, 200% certain, that she was waiting for him. And now these terrible things were being revealed. Apparently, she had found someone else. Pancho, do you want Daddy to come back to you? The question slipped out. Of course, Daddy, I want that. But Mom probably won't agree. She'll be against it, Pancho made a serious conclusion, looking at his father. We'll see about that. Let's talk to Mom together tomorrow. I hope you'll help me convince her. Pancho nodded affirmatively, lowered his head, and began fastening his seatbelt in the child's seat. Where's your mommy? Melania asked, kissing her grandson. Alberto silently took a bag out of the car. Pancho took out a little box and handed it to his grandmother. This is for you, Grandma. Happy birthday. Thank you, my dear. And where's Mom? Marcelo didn't let her come, Pancho replied. Upon hearing her grandson's response, Melania looked at Alberto and smirked. Well, that's news. So Maria wasn't mistaken and really saw my daughter-in-law with an interesting young man at the supermarket. And I didn't believe her. The mother scolded her son with a displeased look and, taking her grandson by the hand, hurried to the table. Melania constantly scolded Alberto for his carelessness and casual attitude towards life. How many times he tried to introduce her to his new girlfriends, but she didn't want to hear about it. She told her son that she already had a daughter-in-law and didn't need another one. Alberto, I can see you aren't really enthusiastic. It's your mother's birthday, but you don't look happy, said the same friend who met Aida at the supermarket. Why would you think that? He snapped. Just asking. Melania grumbled. Aida will soon get married, and he'll keep hopping from bed to bed until he grows old. She told her grandson and grandfather to go to the garden and fetch some greens. Alberto frowned. He least wanted to discuss his personal life with his mother's friends. Moreover, Maria was looking at him as if she knew something he didn't. It would be awkward to ask, and he didn't want to spoil his already ruined mood. Alberto couldn't understand why this news affected him so much. Yeah, if I feel like it to be this way, he began to say, but his mother interrupted right away. Don't make me laugh, she sarcastically smirked. Silence fell over the table. The only sounds were the rustling of dry leaves and the faint crackling of charcoal in the grill. Curious glances from the guests briefly rested on Alberto. If their eyes met, the women turned their gaze away. Under the watchful eyes of his mother's friends, Alberto realized something very important. His pitiful attempts to prove to himself that he could be independent and live as he pleased, disregarding the opinions and judgments of others, had completely failed. He was tired of it all. After sitting with everyone at the festive table, Alberto apologized and secluded himself in the gazebo. Speaking out loud to himself, he reasoned that he wouldn't let Aida go. She still loved him. They had a son. For Pancho's sake, they had to be together. He just had to wait for a meeting with his wife. They would have a serious talk. He would listen attentively to all her grievances. Aida would leave Marcelo, and they would be together again. Hello. Aida, hello, darling. I was waiting for you, but you never showed up, Melania answered the incoming call. Alberto fell silent halfway through, listening attentively. Pancho also perked up his ears. Grandma, is that Mom calling? Tell her I don't want to go home yet. Let her not pick me up too early, he interjected into the conversation, and his grandmother raised her index finger. Quiet, grandson, let me talk to your mom, she said, covering the receiver with her hand and continued. Why is that? Busy? Yes, of course, don't worry. He'll come to our place and spend the night there. Tomorrow morning, we'll take him to kindergarten and you can pick him up in the evening. Deal. Melania looked at Alberto with a displeased look. The guests had dispersed the day before. Today, she didn't need to restrain her ambitions and could behave as her son deserved. Hurtful words were on the tip of her tongue. She wanted to tell her son not to interfere with his apologies to his ex-fiancée. Because her friend had secretly informed her that Aida's new fiancé was running for city council. Pancho, you'll stay with Grandma and Grandpa tonight. Mom is busy, she smiled at her grandson. But where's Mom? Mom doesn't inform me about her whereabouts. Don't you want to stay with Grandma and Grandpa for one more night? I just miss Mom. I wanted her to pick me up in the evening. Pancho looked at his father, who was absent-mindedly stirring his porridge with a spoon. It seemed not only Pancho was interested when Aida called. Alberto made a dissatisfied grunt and silently shook his head, deciding to refrain from commenting in front of his son. He took out his phone from the side pocket and typed a message. Hey, are you okay? Do you need any help? Just let me know, and I'll come. I'm fine. No need to worry. Just take care of our son. Pancho has plenty of babysitters here. Shall I come? I told you, there's no need. Are you afraid I'll run into your Marcelo? Alberto didn't want to touch that topic, but he couldn't contain his dissatisfaction. And he certainly wasn't indifferent to who would be around his son. I have nothing to be afraid of. In case you forgot, let me remind you. I divorced my husband a long time ago. Marcelo has a great relationship with Pancho. Each of us is going our own way. Let's not interfere with each other in our personal lives. You're greatly mistaken, Alberto replied and threw his phone on the table. He needed to collect himself and think everything through. Because he didn't like the way Aida boldly responded to him. What happened to her? She had her own life. And she didn't even think that some unknown man was with his son. Alberto stopped the conversation. Now he needed to put the phone away somewhere far, so he wouldn't lose control and start texting his ex again. Later, he would only regret his words and impulsive actions. Hi. Have you missed Mom? Aida squatted down and hugged her son tightly. She barely made it through the workday. Marcelo convinced her to leave their son at her former mother-in-law's place, as he wanted to introduce Aida to his parents. Aida shivered, remembering the disapproval she felt from Marcelo's mother. As if Aida had intruded into their family and had taken their beloved little son. Of course, I did. I stayed at Dad's place. We wanted to come to you yesterday. But it was too late, so we changed our minds, Pancho replied, hugging Aida back. Then he turned his head to the side and fell into deep thought. It seemed he had decided that his mother wasn't alone at home, and their unexpected arrival might ruin a romantic meeting. You should have. Actually, I came home late myself. And where has our mommy been for so long? Aida heard her ex-husband's familiar voice. The question slipped out of his mouth. Alberto scolded himself mentally. Instead of greeting her, asking how her weekend went, he immediately expressed he wasn't satisfied with the situation. At this rate, he would never win his wife back. Mommy also has the right to her personal life, am I wrong? Aida turned to Alberto, putting on a mask of displeasure and shaking her head. You don't look good. Probably didn't get enough sleep? He snarked, once again scolding himself for not holding back and needling his ex-wife. I slept like a log all night, Aida grinned. Well, son, say goodbye to Daddy. It's time for us to go home. I'm coming with you. We need to talk, Alberto took his son's hand. Aida's eyebrows raised in surprise. About what? Don't scare me. Did you have a good rest? I hope nothing bad happened. We'll talk at home, Alberto waved his hand at Aida, and he and Pancho walked towards the gate. If someone had hinted a few days ago that he would drastically change his view and decide to return to the family, Alberto would have laughed for a long time, twirling his finger by his temple and saying that such a turn of events was impossible, period. And now, upon learning that his ex had started a romance, it hurt him to the core. He had no intention of staying put and waiting to receive a wedding invitation. Pancho ran off to his room, leaving his parents alone. He understood that the adults needed to talk. He closed the door tightly and began carefully arranging his scattered toys on the shelves. Alberto went to the bathroom and turned on the faucet. Seeing a men's toothbrush in the cup, he forgot to wash his hands, turned the tap off, and stormed into the kitchen with undisguised anger. Well, for yourself. I left you this apartment not for you to bring men here and have them leave their toothbrushes, he sneered. Thanks for the apartment. But you forgot that we bought it together. You acted like a real man. I won't argue with that. But did you really think I would stay alone for the rest of my life while you were having one girlfriend after another? Ida replied. That won't happen again. I promise you, Alberto mumbled quietly, confident that it truly wouldn't happen again. You should have thought about that earlier. Now it's too late. Your train has left. Hearing the words that hurt him deeply, Alberto took a step, rushed towards Ida, grabbed her in his arms, waited for a moment, and began kissing her face frantically. Taking a few steps, he pressed her against the wall so she couldn't escape his embrace. Ida closed her eyes, then opened them and collided with his firm, unwavering, daring gaze. She pursed her lip, wriggling in his embrace. What's happening here? Marcelo knew that the doorbell at Aida's place didn't work. Just in case, he pushed the door, remembering that Pancho often forgot to turn the key, for which Ida scolded him frequently. The door was unlocked. Listening to sounds from the kitchen, he headed there without hesitation. Does he already have keys to our apartment? Alberto hissed, still holding Ida in his arms. That's none of your business. Let go of my woman, Marcelo lunged at Alberto but froze in place upon hearing a familiar voice. Hello. I guess I came at a bad time. A woman stood in the doorway, looking concerned. It seemed like she felt weak in the knees and unconsciously leaned against the door frame. Biting her lower lip as she was nervous, she scanned everyone present one by one. Georgina, what are you doing here? Marcelo asked, surprised. I've been keeping tabs on you. I've wanted to look my rival in the eye for a long time. Everyone was shocked, looking at Georgina with astonishment. Marcelo's face expressed nothing but anger and disgust. Taking a few steps, the girl approached Marcelo and slapped him hard. Maybe you'll introduce us? She smirked, stepped aside, and slowly sat down on a chair. Ida felt like the same unpleasant and heavy situation at the restaurant was repeating itself when it was such a shame for her that she wanted to sink into the ground. And all their friends looked at her with pity. But now, her ex-husband was present as a spectator, genuinely interested in the unfolding drama. Georgina, go home. We've settled everything a long time ago, Marcelo muttered through gritted teeth, rubbing his cheek. But Georgina, unfazed by his threatening tone, continued. Ida, please leave Marcelo alone. We have a little child. Our son is only 2 years old. And once our daddy met you. He completely forgot he had a family, her eyes welled up with tears. Georgina wiped away a tear and sniffled before speaking again. If you don't stop seeing each other, I'll have to talk to the press. I think this information will interest the press before the elections. I'd be happy to become a talk show star and make some money out of it. Ida suddenly realized that she didn't want to know anything about it. Let them dig through their own dirty laundry and figure out who was to blame. She immediately wanted to kick everyone out of the door. Take a breath. Think clearly so that she wouldn't have to gather the pieces of herself again later. Everyone, leave. Get out of my apartment, Ida forced out. She didn't even recognize her own voice. Ida, forgive us. We'll leave now, but we'll need to talk to you tomorrow. Georgina and I don't live together. Our marriage has been falling apart for a long time. Get out, all of you, she interrupted Marcelo, not letting him finish. Life hasn't taught me anything. I regret I haven't asked you to show your passport earlier. Leave with you, husband. Isn't that why you came? Ida shivered, clasping herself with both hands, trying to calm down and suppress the trembling in her fingers. Marcelo really didn't need any more problems right now. Their relationship with Georgina was doomed from the start. Marcelo could go for months without coming home, without bothering to explain himself to his wife. Georgina herself had never shown much interest in him. She had never cared where he spent his free time or with whom. But now, when he got hooked on another girl, Georgina suddenly changed her behavior and began to worry. And now she was a real threat to him. Ida, you'll calm down today, and tomorrow we'll talk calmly without anyone around. I'll call you. Marcelo shifted his gaze to Georgina. Let's go. Stop pretending to be a faithful wife. Marcelo rushed out onto the street, got into his car, and kept an eye on Georgina, hoping she wouldn't cause any more trouble. He would get into his own car and calmly drive home. Along the way, he dialed Aida's phone number several times, but she didn't answer. Then the operator's voice informed him that the number was temporarily unavailable. How are you feeling? Alberto asked, feeling sorry for her and realizing that his question was inappropriate at the moment. But he couldn't come up with anything smarter to say. I'm fine. If it's not too much trouble, can you take Pancho for another night? I just need some time alone to think. I don't want my son to see me like this. Ida looked anxiously at her ex-husband. Maybe we could, Alberto offered. No, we can't. I'm asking you, please do as I say and don't ask unnecessary questions. Fine. I'll take him. Pancho. Alberto shouted loudly. You'll be staying at my place tonight. Aida's friend listened attentively as Ida recounted her encounter with Marcelo. She furrowed her brows and shook her head when Ida mentioned Georgina. Sometimes she made comments, inserted a few words, sighed, and occasionally threw in a swear word, trying to engage in the conversation and emotionally express her disapproval. They had been talking at the kitchen table for about 2 hours. After finishing a bottle of white wine, they decided to have some fun and go to a nightclub for a little while. Aida's phone kept vibrating nonstop. Marcelo called several times, but she didn't answer. After glancing at the screen once again, Ida felt dizziness. She grabbed onto the bar counter, trying to steady herself, and she managed to do it quite well. Hello, she answered Alberto's call. Aren't you at home? Why do you care where I am? It should be the least of your concerns. The real mess was happening in Aida's head. Whether it was due to the alcohol she had consumed or because of the overwhelming emotions flooding her. Losing sight of her friend for a moment, Ida rejected the call as it wasn't the appropriate time for it. Hey, she heard and almost dropped her phone from surprise. What a pleasant encounter. Alberto's friend embraced her by the waist. Hi. Ida stepped back to avoid close contact. Suddenly, she felt uncomfortable, as if she had intruded into someone else's family. Why are you alone? Where's Viola? Alberto asked. We haven't been living together for a year, just like you, Lino flirted with her, smirking. They both sat at the bar counter, and after about an hour, Ida felt the nervous tension dissipating. Oh God, I feel like I might die, Ida groaned. She had never felt this terrible in her life. Her head was heavy, and there was a bitter taste in her mouth. Ida tried to open her eyes, but everything was spinning around her as if she was riding on a merry-go-round. Ida, get up. It's time to go to work, she heard Lino's voice. He was sitting in a chair across from her, surfing his phone. Lino, I hope nothing happened between us? She barely managed to utter. You really don't remember anything? He smirked. It was such a shame, so she wanted to hide or, even better, become invisible. Ida felt terribly ashamed of her behavior and how she had embarrassed herself in her own eyes. She hardly remembered anything about the previous night. The last clear memory was meeting Lino, and then everything went blank. Calm down, Lino shrugged her off. If something had happened between us, you would have definitely remembered. Be thankful that I didn't take advantage of you. Otherwise, someone else would have done it because of your state of being. I don't abandon friends in need. Thank goodness. Thank you, Lino. Do you have a headache pill? She barely managed to say, still battling nausea and dizziness. A few minutes later, Lino brought her a glass of water with a fizzing tablet. Someone knocked on the door. Quickly downing the effervescent drink, Ida buried herself under the blanket and closed her eyes. Alberto burst into the apartment, not bothering to take off his shoes, and rushed into the bedroom. Lino went into the room right after him, holding his nose as it was broken. He tried to explain something, but no one was willing to listen. Did you have a good rest, darling? Alberto said, as Ida pulled her head out from under the covers and looked at him. She knew exactly what he must be thinking. How did you guess that I spent the night at Lino's? She asked, not even intending to justify herself. Just look, Alberto played a video that had been sent to him this morning. See how well you enjoyed yourself yesterday. I never doubted for a minute that I would find you here early in the morning. Now you're a YouTube star. Maybe you want me to take our son away from you? Alberto, what are you talking about? Take Pancho away? On what grounds? Ida wanted to deliver her speech with confidence, but her voice quivered and came out hesitant and even cowardly, completely different from how she wanted to. Alberto grimaced in disgust, shrugged his shoulders as if there was some slumped woman lying on the bed asking for money to continue the party. Look at yourself. I don't even pay attention to the videos that have been sent to me, at least 6 of them, with a message to watch how my ex-wife and the mother of my child is having fun. Alberto rushed towards her, his hand already extended, wanting to show her the video. But he didn't get the chance. Lino knocked him off his feet and landed a good punch to his ribs. Taken by surprise, Alberto fell into the armchair. That's for my nose so that you don't get too comfortable, Lino explained, rubbing his swollen nose with his fingers. And when Alberto started to get up, Lino rushed at him and landed a punch in his eye. What's wrong with you? Are you crazy? Alberto hissed angrily and retaliated with a punch. They grappled with each other, exchanging punches and hurling insults. Stop it. Have you both lost your minds? The neighbors will gather if you keep this up, Ida shouted, forgetting about her headache. But no one paid attention to her. Without thinking twice, she wrapped herself in a blanket and rushed to separate them. As she tried to stand between them, the blanket fell off, but she no longer felt it. She only felt a pain in her shoulder as she stepped aside and closed her eyes to ward off the pain. However, it wasn't the pain from the blow that confused Ida when she opened her eyes. It was the gaze of the 2 men. Alberto, with his eyes widened in disbelief, stared at her as if he had just discovered something unpleasant under his fingernail. Get dressed, he sneered in disgust and shifted his gaze to Lino. Alberto, there was nothing between us. I swear. I just brought Ida home from the club yesterday. I didn't want to leave her alone. It's not a good idea for her to stay home alone in that state. I assured her friend that everything would be fine. Lino began to justify himself. Alberto only smirked crookedly and, naturally, didn't believe a word. Are you okay? Did you get hurt badly? Lino rushed over to her. Alberto clenched his jaw tightly so that the dimples in his cheeks disappeared. He picked up the blanket from the floor and threw it at Ida. He made his suit fitting well and touched his hair, smoothing his hairstyle. And you dare to tell me that there was nothing between you? Alberto said with difficulty. It's hard to believe. I would have never thought that my ex-wife could be so promiscuous. And I wanted to come back. Be careful on the turns, Alberto. Don't say things now that you will deeply regret. Lino casually surveyed him from head to toe, showing with his appearance that he wouldn't let harm Ida, that she was protected by him. Take a good look at yourself. Who do you think you are? You disappeared for 3 years, and now you've decided to come back. Who needs you? We lived with our son just fine without you, Ida taunted. Our son needs me, Alberto replied, tilting his head to the side with disgust. I never thought you could be such a mother, he said as he was heading towards the exit. He opened the front door, and only when Alberto had left the apartment, Lino cursed and then tried to calm his overnight guest. Don't pay attention to him. The important thing is that we know there was nothing between us. Lino, then who undressed me? Ida asked, still hoping that she had done it herself. It was me, of course. I felt sorry for your suit. Don't worry, I had poor vision yesterday. I didn't even look at you, Lino shrugged indifferently, showing his indifference. You better not have done that. Ida felt uncomfortable before Lino, imagining how it must have looked. Ida blushed, her face turning red with embarrassment. She covered her blushing cheeks with her hands. Seeing how she reacted, Lino pressed his lips together and shrugged his shoulders in surprise, choosing not to respond to her words. Ida couldn't focus on her work. The few hours before lunch felt like an eternity. Working with a headache was not a pleasant experience. Ida hesitated for a long time, holding her phone in her hands, still unsure whether to watch the video of her night out at the club. However, she assumed that she wouldn't see anything good in it. Judging by her condition, there was much to see. The phone kept buzzing. All her acquaintances and friends were sending her messages, which Ida didn't even bother to read. Ida played the video and was horrified. Lino was supporting her, and she leaned over and simply fell off the chair. Then there were the dances. The video was not for the faint of heart. Ida was just hanging on to Lino and attempting to kiss him. Fortunately, Lino didn't take an advantage of a heavily intoxicated girl. There were also unpleasant moments when he held Ida by the waist and playfully slapped her butt, trying to revive and bring her back to her senses. Ida skipped the dance on the bar counter. She couldn't watch the video till the end. By evening, Ida had managed to restore her appearance to its divine state. She adjusted her hairstyle, touched up her eyes and lips. In the morning, she couldn't even bring herself to take care of her appearance. As she left the office, in the corridor her phone came back to life. Marcelo was calling. Hi. Can we meet today? He asked as if nothing had happened. I'm going to pick up our son from kindergarten, Ida replied. I'll wait for you near the entrance. Can you spare me half an hour? Okay, she sighed loudly, quickly ending the call. If yesterday Marcelo was consumed by worry, today he tried not to give in to that feeling. Ida ignored him, not answering his calls or reading his messages. However, his mood improved when Ida answered his call and agreed to meet. While waiting for her near the daycare, his younger brother called. What's going on? We just talked recently, Marcelo grumbled, trying to get rid of him as quickly as possible. I guess now it's you, not me, who has problems. I sent you a few links. Take a look, and the call ended with a series of short beeps. What the hell is this? Marcelo frowned, seeing the headline nightlife of the city. Opening the video, he saw a drunken girl climbing onto the bar counter. Why do I need this? Did Georgina stir something up again? Or did one of her friends have a good time? Looking closer, he recognized Ida. His interest immediately sparked, but he couldn't watch the video until the end. The passenger door opened. Ida wearily slumped into the front seat. Seeing Marcelo's disgusted face, she understood everything. Everyone knew how she had spent the previous night. He didn't express their surprise. What's this? Marcelo turned on the video again and continued watching. I never understood people who want to show off better than they really are, he said, turning off the phone and carelessly tossing it onto the dashboard. The heat rushed over her from his harsh and unpleasant gaze. Marcelo was looking at Ida in a way that made her want to jump out of the car and run away without any explanations. So you came here just to express your disgust to me? Go ahead. Now you know the real me, Ida raised an eyebrow. I went out to a nightclub yesterday. I decided to have some fun. Can't just rest away at home. Sorry for not living up to your expectations. My head still hurts as I'm not accustomed to it, she smirked. Judging by the video, it won't be better anytime soon for you, Marcelo scoffed, shaking his head. There's nothing worse than a drunken woman, especially if that woman is someone close to you, he continued to shame Ida. It's terrible when you become attached to someone, and they turn out to be happily married, she retorted with a trembling voice. Now you're suddenly lecturing me, Ida couldn't hold back, and she couldn't stop until she had said everything she thought about him. I hope at least you spent the night alone at home. Marcelo softened his tone a bit. He was confident that Ida wouldn't go too far. Ida had proven herself to be a good homemaker and mother. Marcelo was convinced that she would be the perfect wife for him, unlike Georgina, who lived her own life and only demanded money for shopping and entertainment. Marcelo had wanted to divorce her for a long time, but he was restrained by the upcoming elections. No, I didn't stay home. I stayed at Lino's. But nothing happened between us. At least that's what he says. Honestly, I don't remember anything, Ida said with an uncertain voice, deciding that she had nothing left to lose. It doesn't get any easier with every word you're saying. I'm afraid to ask you something else. Marcelo ran his hands through his hair, instinctively massaging his scalp, thinking about what to do with the information. Everything had been perfect. But the perfect picture shattered since last night when two people intruded into their stable life. First, Georgina with her complaints, and then this guy who dared to touch his woman. Marcelo wanted to find him urgently and punish him for his mischievous behavior. Goodbye, Marcelo. I need to pick up our child. Pancho will be alone in the group soon. Seeing his puzzled face, Ida realized that Marcelo didn't know what the best way for him to act was. Now she was a girl with a dubious reputation, and that didn't interest him. Goodbye, Marcelo replied when Ida had already left the car and closed the door. I need to find this Lino urgently and have a man-to-man talk. I want to hear his version of how he spent the night with my woman, Marcelo said thoughtfully, watching Ida as she was walking away. Maybe you won't step on the same rake again? Brother, I advise you to get this girl out of your head and focus on your career. Isn't Georgina enough for you? Now you don't know how to get rid of her. Why did you even get married? It didn't matter she got pregnant. If you hadn't been so soft-hearted, she would have had an abortion. Pablo tried to explain to his brother for about 40 minutes, urging him to get Ida out of his mind and focus on more important and useful matters. And when Marcelo suggested going to see Lino and talking to him man-to-man, he completely panicked. He believed that only insecure people engage in such foolishness. There are millions of girls around, no need to fixate on such a corrupt girl like Ida. Take a break in your relationship. Think it through. Sometimes separation can be beneficial, Pablo continued, persuading his brother. Maybe I'll do that. Time will tell, Marcelo agreed with his brother, deciding to listen to the advice and actually take a break in their relationship. Hello, Ida heard Lino's voice on the phone. Memories flooded in, and she felt nervous. It was as if she were free-falling without any safety harness. Hi, she replied. Just wanted to check on how you're doing, Lino said. Aida tensed and squeezed her lips. Why did he remind her of her indecent behavior in a public place? What kind of how you're doing can there be? I'm just going through the motions. If it weren't for my son, I would have fallen asleep a long time ago, Ida bit her lip. Are you mad at me? Lino unexpectedly asked. For what? I don't know. For everything, he chuckled. Don't talk nonsense. I'm to blame for everything. If I were to be upset, it would only be with myself, Ida rolled her eyes. After meeting Marcelo, her heart felt heavy. If it weren't for her son, she would have cried long ago, laying on a pillow. She had to admit to herself that despite Marcelo turning out to be a married man, her feelings hadn't disappeared. If yesterday she had hoped for something, today, after seeing him, she understood that it was just the end. There was nothing to hold on to. She didn't want to dwell under illusions, hiding in her world, but she wanted to know forward in life with her head held high. It was me who recorded and shared you with my friends, boasting about how much fun we were having. I was also drunk and unaware of my actions. I'm sorry, Lino unexpectedly expressed everything that weighed on his soul. Does it matter? If people like it, let them watch. I don't care anymore. Aida's words were filled with resentment, and Lino immediately slumped, understanding how emotionally difficult it was for her. Are you mad at me? He asked. No, she replied curtly. I can feel I swear it won't happen again. And to make up for my mistake, I'm ready to marry you. Lino patiently waited for Aida's response, but she, not attaching much importance to his joke, heard a chirping sound. She declined the call and went to open the front door. Alberto was standing on the doorstep. Aida was initially taken aback, not expecting to see him. Next to him was a stroller with a boy sitting in it. The boy didn't look entirely healthy. It was visible that he had some developmental disabilities. Can I come in? Sure, she said, surprised, opening the door wider and letting in the unexpected guests. I actually thought you'd be busy today, licking your wounds, he joked, taking off his shoes. Since when do you care about how I spend my free time? It never used to bother you. Or is there no one in your personal life so that you decided to give your ex-wife some advice? Believe me, you're not the person whose opinion I'll listen to. Whose child is this? Aida couldn't resist and asked, burning with curiosity. He's my son, Alberto snapped instantly. A moment later, Pancho came running. The three of them closed themselves in a room. They laughed, talked loudly, and argued. Aida could only wait for her ex to fulfill his parental duties and explain in detail where the child came from. We need to talk. His resolute tone pulled Aida out of the state of agonizing anticipation. In the room, Pancho was arranging scattered toys. I'd like that too. Aida couldn't take her eyes off the boy. I want to come back to you with my son, he muttered. What? Her eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. His mother left Nemesio with me today and just drove off. Didn't even say where. No one wants sick children. I also didn't make a big deal out of it and didn't tell anyone that I had such a child. I don't know what to do. Natalia was immediately told about the deviations, but she didn't believe the doctors. She said they don't know how to treat and that she'll give birth to a healthy child. I told her right away that I didn't want it and not to count on me, and look how it turned out. She found herself a man and ran away with him. I never imagined she could abandon the child. Alberto sighed heavily. He covered his eyes and silently counted to 10. He remembered how excited he was when Aida gave birth to Pancho. He called all his relatives and friends, sharing his joy with everyone. But as soon as he found out about Nemesio, he immediately felt an unpleasant sense of regret. It was as if he were led to the gallows, with only a few minutes left until inevitable death. Don't even think about it, Alberto. I sympathize with you, of course, but I'm not ready for such sacrifices. Raise your son. Hire a nanny. It's time to take responsibility for your actions. The child is not to blame for anything. Aida fell silent. This news overshadowed her performance at the nightclub. She would probably even overshadow global events and news over the past 24 hours. For the first time in her life, she genuinely felt sorry for Alberto. He didn't deserve such an ending. Despite her resentment, Aida never turned her son against him because Alberto was a good father. Daddy, is this your son? Alberto turned around. Pancho was standing in the doorway, his eyes widened in horror as he looked at the poor child. His eyebrows furrowed. The father didn't say who this boy was to him, and Pancho didn't ask. They played, and the boy smiled and watched them. Son, look, Alberto struggled to find the right words, trying to explain to his son why things happened this way, but he couldn't find the right words. His thoughts were all mixed up. Pancho turned around without saying another word and ran away. He locked himself in his room and cried bitterly. Hearing his son's cry, Alberto rushed into the room to comfort and explain to him. I think it's time for you to go, Aida interrupted him, deciding that this pointless conversation needed to end. Shaking her shoulders, she gestured toward the door. I'll explain everything to Pancho myself. I think he'll understand you. Go home, it's late already. I've had enough trouble for today with my pounding head. Let me think it over, sort things out, and not miss anything. Taking a deep sigh, Alberto headed toward the exit with his son. Why is all this happening to me? Alberto squeezed out, stepping out of Aida's apartment and almost screaming in frustration. He sat at his desk and continued working calmly. When his cell phone rang, Alberto chose not to answer the unknown number. But the call repeated. His sixth sense told him that the caller wouldn't bring good news, but Alberto answered. Hello. Am I speaking to Alberto? He heard an elderly female voice on the other end. My name is Marina. I'm Natalia's neighbor. Sometimes I take care of Nemesio. You see. Anyway, Natalia left and didn't take Nemesio with her. She's been gone for 3 days now. Today, I found a note with your phone number in the baby stroller. Please come and pick up your son. Natalia wrote that she won't be coming back. Marina continued speaking, but Alberto couldn't hear her anymore. He began to feverishly think, contemplating the order of his next steps. The last time Alberto spoke to Natalia on the phone, she asked for money, explaining that it was needed for additional medical procedures. Having given his approval, she happily announced that she had found a new man and they would leave soon. This wonderful news filled Alberto with indescribable joy. It was fortunate that Natalia rented an apartment in another neighborhood. Hardly anyone knew that he had a child with developmental disabilities. Alberto himself didn't tell anyone about it, not even his parents, envisioning how his mother would react to such news. Melania always scolded him for leaving the family and getting into trouble. Nemesio was already starting to fuss, as if sensing his father's indecisiveness and demanding specific actions from him. Alberto had no choice but to go to his parents' house and introduce them to their grandson. Melania looked at Alberto with such a gaze that made him shudder and feel like sinking into the ground on the spot. Hello, little one. Who is this? Whose child is he? She looked at the boy without averting her gaze. Nemesio slept peacefully in his stroller. Mom, this is your grandson, Alberto calmly said, deciding not to hide anymore, like an ostrich burying its head in the sand. He wanted to be completely honest and see how his parents would react to this news. Our grandson? Melania clutched her heart, and a chill ran through Alberto's body. But he held his ground, enduring his mother's surprised gaze until she disappointedly leaned against the wall and then slumped onto the poof. Alberto was about to offer his mother first aid, but she waved him away. Dad, come and meet your grandson and bring some valerian drops. I assume the boy isn't completely healthy? She said softly, trying not to wake or scare the child. Alberto nodded. Under the watchful eyes of his parents, he began to take off his shoes. He decided not to disturb Nemesio for now. It was time to talk to his parents, explain everything, and seek their support. He couldn't live alone with Nemesio. Hello, son. I didn't understand. Who is this? The father asked, extending a calming tablet to his wife. This is your grandson. Let me explain everything to you. And what do you suggest? The mother asked, placing a second life-saving calming tablet under her tongue. The crushing pain on the left side of her chest didn't subside after receiving such news. The father held up much better, but it was evident he didn't experience any joy. Alberto, how could you get involved with a woman like Natalia? Why didn't you insist that she stop doing her amateur performances and listen to the advice of doctors when she received such a terrible diagnosis? And now, like a cuckoo, she left you with a child and disappeared in an unknown direction. She'll get married now, change her name, her passport. Good luck finding her, the father sighed heavily. Alberto knew they couldn't escape from this situation. They would help raise their grandson. It seemed fate sent them such trials to test their resilience. Have you done a paternity test? Is this really our grandson? Melania asked, observing her husband. He carefully examined the sleeping Nemesio, looking for resemblances to Alberto. He's mine. Definitely mine. I did 2 DNA tests, and both came back positive. I also hoped for a miracle, Alberto sighed heavily. Well then, welcome. Come in. Make yourselves at home. There's no way we'll abandon him now. We can't just put our grandson in an orphanage, Melania said, wiping away her tears and sniffing her nose. She thought about talking to the former daughter-in-law about swapping apartments. Who would have known that their son would present them with such an unexpected gift? A week had passed. Alberto didn't show up anymore. Ida also didn't call him. During this time, an inexplicable anxiety weighed on her. She was afraid that Alberto would come back with his proposal to live as one family again. She didn't even remember the performance she had done at the nightclub. Whatever. People would talk and then forget. Thoughts kept returning to Alberto. She constantly was thinking about his son's face. Her heart was beating too fast, recalling his disjointed account of how his mother had acted, abandoning the child to fate and leaving in an unknown direction. In the evening, as Ida was getting ready to leave her office and head home, she saw Lino entering. He, too, had been silent for a whole week, which she was immensely relieved about. So, she didn't feel any excitement when he unexpectedly showed up on Friday evening. Do you want to invite me to the nightclub? I'll tell you right away, I won't go, Ida responded on the go. No, I have a more interesting proposal. I'll wait for you downstairs. Don't pass by. I'm sure you won't be able to refuse, Lino replied, hesitated for a little bit, and chuckled. I'm coming already, Ida accepted the challenge. She was still holding grudge on him, of course. It was still embarrassing to recall certain moments. Marcelo disappeared after her performance at the club. He doesn't call or write. It was to be expected. Who needs a woman who can't handle her drinks and behave decently in public places? You look great as always, Lino handed her a bouquet of flowers. Thank you. So unexpected. Flowers. Very nice, Ida took the bouquet in her hands and happily breathed in the scent. We have something to talk about, Lino smiled. Go ahead. I'm in a hurry. I still need to pick up Pancho, Ida began to reason on the spot. The offer was tempting. Ida had long been concerned about her employment situation. She sent out resumes, but no one even responded. They all just said to wait for a call. Either they rejected her immediately. Why me? Are you trying to make up for your mistakes this way? Ida asked, still not believing Lino and expecting another catch. Because I like you. I think about you all the time. But that's not the main reason. I just want to help you. Would you love to? Lino said seriously. The offer is tempting. Of course, I agree, Ida smiled, noticing Lino's stunning brown eyes. On Monday, Ida submitted a letter of resignation of her own accord. She had 2 weeks left to work. During that time, she was constantly in touch with Lino. His monotonous voice reassured her, saying that they would definitely wait for her and she wouldn't be left without a job. And the way he constantly encouraged her and instilled confidence in her, Ida calmed down and believed that everything would work out for her. The weather deteriorated before their eyes. There was lightning and thunder. It began to drizzle. Alberto pushed the stroller in front of him. Its wheels constantly sank into the mud. He had to drive through puddles to at least partially clean the wheels from the accumulated dirt. Taking a walk with his son was burdensome and unfamiliar. When Pancho was little, Ida never bothered him. She always went for walks alone or sometimes entrusted it to the grandparents. But Melania, without asking, handed Alberto the stroller and sent him out with their son. She explained that the child needed fresh air and they needed a break. It would have been okay if the child were healthy. It became tiresome to see the pity in people's eyes. They encountered happy mothers with strollers along the way, in which healthy and chubby babies sat. Alberto had nothing to boast about. He had to avert his eyes when they passed, to avoid the sympathetic gazes of other mothers. Alberto was troubled by the fact that he felt nothing for his son. He took care of him like a robot, simply because he had to. It was different with Pancho. He had always been a wanted child, despite Aida's unplanned pregnancy. Everyone was infinitely happy about the news, carrying it almost on a pedestal and eagerly anticipating the arrival of the baby. Alberto, hi. Who is this? Lino approached him. Surprise overflowed from his eyes as he carefully examined Nemesio. Hi, Alberto reluctantly frowned and extended his hand. My son. Nemesio. How is that possible? Then why did you scold Aida? What does it matter to you where she is and who she's with? Lino couldn't hide his confusion. And Alberto, seeing his questioning gaze, became even angrier. He remembered how Lino was flirting with his ex-wife at the nightclub. And now he's left to take care of a son who may never be able to move independently for the rest of his life. Aida is the mother of my eldest son. And I do care about where she spends her free time and with whom. Stay away from her. You have a bad influence on her, Alberto gritted his teeth as he muttered. After expressing his point of view about his ex-wife, Alberto pushed the stroller forward with resentment, not even saying goodbye. Just to stay away from such people whom he didn't want to be associated with. Upon arriving home, Alberto first decided to calm down. Without undressing, he approached the bar, poured himself whiskey, and drank it in one gulp, closing his eyes. You seem to be getting attached to alcohol quite often. It won't be long before you're a full-blown alcoholic. And you, by the way, are the father of 2 children. One of them is disabled. So, please, take care of your health. Your father and I won't live forever, Melania scolded, taking Nemesio out of the stroller and disapprovingly watching her beloved son relieve stress. I can't. I feel nauseous. I avoid people. I don't want to see or hear anyone, Alberto said, opening his eyes, feeling an immense sense of hurt and heaviness in his soul. It's too late, son. Stop whining. Do you think it's easy for us, your father and me? Don't worry, people will get used to Nemesio and stop paying attention to him. Maybe now you'll get a little wiser, Melania sighed heavily, wiping away a tear. Good evening, Aida. Her former mother-in-law was standing at the doorstep, with a cake in her hands. Aida sensed insincerity in her voice for the first time in her life. Melania's behavior was unsettling, and Aida immediately felt discomfort in her soul. Good evening, Melania. Aida kissed her on the cheek out of habit and helped her take off her coat. Come to the kitchen, I'll make coffee. While I'm setting the table, you can spend some time with your grandson. Pancho is in his room. Thank you, Aida. We'll talk to Pancho later. I'm in no hurry. I want to have a chat secretly with you. Melania sighed heavily and plopped down on the offered chair. Aida, I came here to talk to you, like a woman to woman. You're aware that we are now raising our grandson. She looked at her former daughter-in-law and only continued when Aida nodded several times. Believe me, life has cruelly punished my son. Alberto is hard to recognize. From a cheerful and lively young man, he has turned into a nervous and unstable person. He started avoiding people, Melania sobbed, took out a handkerchief, wiped her teary eyes, blew her nose, and shook her head. If only you could forgive him, Aida. Everyone makes mistakes. Believe me, I knew about my husband's affair when we were young. I won't hide it, he also had his flings. But I am a wise woman and managed to close eyes on it and preserve the family. Aida, if you don't reach out to Alberto, he'll be lost in this life. In that case, we'll keep Nemesio with us. You can take him occasionally so that we can have a rest with his grandfather. Melania sobbed again and looked up at Aida with tear-filled eyes. Melania, it's impossible. I can't forgive Alberto. He left me. In the restaurant, he shouted that he didn't love me and never did. He only married me because I got pregnant. After his public outburst, I had to pick up the pieces of myself. How could I forgive him after a such thing? Ida didn't bring up the topic of their illegitimate child. She didn't dare openly tell her former mother-in-law that she wasn't ready to accept a healthy child, let alone an ill one. Then I'd like to talk about the apartment. I myself initiated Alberto not to touch the apartment and transfer his share to our son. I was sure that you would still be together. I would never have come to you with such a proposal. But circumstances have turned out in such a way that Alberto cannot live with us forever. We need to buy an apartment nearby so that we can help whenever necessary. You understand? We have a sick child in our hands who will never get better. And Alberto also needs to rest. He should have his own space. Melania recited her rehearsed speech and finished her glass of water. It was difficult for her to talk to Ida, but she was convinced that Ida would understand. Ida, could you take the initiative and divide the apartment yourself? Melania asked fawningly, clutching Aida's hand and trying once again to appeal to her pity. Melania, I didn't expect such a surprise from you. Ida slumped onto the nearby chair, digesting what she had just heard. When she divorced Alberto, he himself had initiated it and gifted his share to their son. Ida didn't expect Alberto to be so generous and was willing to divide their assets. But now, no. Do you know that it's considered inappropriate to take back what was given? What does that mean? You gave it as a gift, and now you want to take it back? Melania, you should have brought a cake. After your words, I won't be able to eat it. And sweets are harmful to Pancho. Your treats will make his teeth ache. Take him and leave. I have nothing more to discuss with you. And tell Alberto that he won't get his part of the apartment. Ida expressed everything to her mother-in-law and with a nod of her head, pointed towards the exit. The words of her former mother-in-law, spoken with such confidence and composure, stuck in her throat. They irritated her and prevented her from thinking logically. Ida gasped for air, trying to gather herself and not let those words clutter her mind. Deciding that Melania wouldn't see her confusion and, on the contrary, would reconsider and refrain from expressing her foolish ideas out loud next time, Ida tried to regain her composure. Ida felt that her mother-in-law was looking at her today in an unusual and peculiar way. There was sadness mixed with a lack of understanding in her eyes. Melania, with her whole demeanor, showed that she didn't recognize the Ida she knew before, the one she thought who was perfect until today. Where had that compliant girl gone, the one she always understood, protected, and treated like her own daughter? Ida, I understand you. That's why I'm not offended. I want you to calm down and consider my proposal. Do you think I'm such a heartless witch, trying to claim your square meters? Believe me, I'm fed up with it too. I know, if Alberto finds out, there will be a huge scandal at home. But I'm a mother. It's hard for me to see my son suffer and lose himself. He's going through a lot. It's a shame that you don't want to support him. But I'm not judging you. As a woman, I understand you. But I will fight for my son. And if I have to fall out with the whole world, believe me, I will do it without hesitation. Think about my offer. Melania unexpectedly stumbled, mentally preparing to continue her prepared speech. But Ida stopped her. Melania, stop trying to play on my sympathy. My opinion won't change. I also have a son growing up, and believe me, I do everything for the sake of his well-being. Ida smiled artificially, opening the entrance door wider. I thought we could come to an agreement peacefully. But it seems we won't be able to do without authorities. Melania lamented. In that case, thanks for the warning. Forewarned is forearmed, Ida retorted, closing the entrance door. Alberto couldn't imagine how his life could change with the arrival of Nemesio. With bitterness, he recalled his vibrant and carefree life and could only sigh heavily, realizing that nothing could be undone. All he could do was hope for the bright side of his life to begin and not rely on anyone but himself. Hearing the sound of the front door lock, Alberto, holding his son in his arms, calmly walked into the dark hallway. What are you doing here without me? Melania forced a smile, switched on the light, and mechanically sank onto the poof. "Mom, are you feeling okay?" Alberto asked in a concerned voice, observing her pale face. "Everything's fine. Don't worry. It'll pass. Bring me some water, if you don't mind." She unzipped her jacket and removed the scarf from her neck. Alberto handed her a glass of water, pausing for a moment and attentively watching her condition. He helped her undress, guided her to the couch, adjusted the pillow, and gently covered her with a blanket. "Mom, did something happen? I can see it. Did someone hurt you?" He took a risk to ask. Melania closed her eyes, then opened them. She looked at her boys with a gaze full of regret, pain, and a pang of conscience for not being able to protect them, to shield them from unpleasantness. "I was visiting Ida," she unexpectedly told him, immediately regretting that she couldn't hold back and told her son about it. Alberto flinched. His heart started beating faster, he even could feel it in his throat. He couldn't even imagine how much he would miss his steady, happy family life. "How are they? I hope everything is fine with them," Alberto asked. Melania hesitated, as if contemplating, weighing the pros and cons in her mind, deciding whether to tell her son everything or keep quiet and not upset him unnecessarily. "I went to see her on business. I asked her to put herself in our shoes and exchange apartments. I hope you're not planning to live next to us for the rest of your life. You also need to build your own life. Don't sacrifice yourself." Melania paused, watching Alberto closely. Alberto widened his eyes, digesting what he had just heard. Barely holding onto his son, he tried to deal with his own turmoil. "Mom, why are you getting involved if there is no need for it? I will never agree to that. If we're a burden to you, I'll find another place to live," he said. "Don't talk nonsense," Melania interrupted him. "Where will you go? I just wanted to talk to Ida. I hoped she would understand your situation and share what you are entitled to by law. She kicked me out and said I shouldn't set foot in their house anymore," Melania sobbed, wiping her nose with her hand. "In her place, I would have done the same," Alberto sadly said, gently settling Nemesio in a playpen with toys. "Please, I beg you, don't interfere anymore. Soon I'll start receiving disability benefits for our child. I've already made arrangements with my boss for some additional work. We'll manage. I'll have a wife and our own apartment. It won't all happen at once." He tried to encourage his mother and set a positive tone. Melania helplessly sobbed, wiping her tears with a handkerchief. She turned away from her son, closed her eyes, and sighed heavily. Ida climbed the stairs, feeling like a child from the elementary school. Her heart was beating fast. It seemed there was no need to worry. She got the job through connections. Someone vouched for her. Everything was settled. There was no probation period. If difficulties arise, they will help her. She could just go and work calmly. There's no need to get worked up and worry without reason. But despite the sweet conditions, everything inside her tightened and trembled. Perhaps because Lino had already betrayed her once, and she couldn't bring herself to fully trust him. She tried to maintain her distance and not respond to his active interest in her. She immediately set boundaries and made it clear that she wouldn't mix personal interests with work. And if Lino disagreed with her terms, then they were not meant to be. "Here's your workspace. Don't worry. If you have any difficulties, they will always help you." Lino waited for her by the elevator. He took her hand and escorted her to his own workspace. "We'll have lunch together. I'll come find you. I'll show you where we eat. You know my phone number. Call me if you get bored. My office is right down the hallway. I've shown it to you before." Lino repeated the same truths for the 100th time, deciding to remind her once again not to worry and that everything was under his control. The first work week passed in a whirlwind of chaos and the exchange of knowledge and skills. Ida familiarized herself with her duties, organized documents, and learned to communicate with clients, offering them her ideas. She enjoyed the work. The days flew by unnoticed. Slowly, fears and anxieties receded into the background, making way for positive outlooks on the future. "Hello," Ida answered the incoming call from Alberto in a cold tone. Alberto was heavily breathing. "Don't know where to start? You've decided to support your mother's idea. Appeal to my conscience and exchange the apartments? Well, let me tell you, it's not going to work. I'm a selfish person, but I won't make any concessions," Alberto said, his voice interrupted by emotion. "Don't talk nonsense. No one is going to take anything away from you." "I will never agree to that," Alberto interrupted. He expressed his point of view and then fell silent abruptly. He took a few seconds to gather his thoughts. Ida patiently waited. "I called you. I wanted to tell you. I'm at the hospital now. Mom had a heart attack. It's so hard for me. Dad stayed with Nemesio. Maybe you could come to me?" Alberto closed his eyes. He gripped the phone so tightly that his fingertips turned pale. He bit his lip, waiting for a refusal. There was silence on the line. Alberto nervously chuckled, thinking about how he had once again committed another foolish act. Why did he even call? He knew very well that Ida would never agree. Perhaps in her place, he would have done the same. "Alberto, I'm working. I don't know. I'll try to ask for time off. Let me call you back in a few minutes," Ida replied. She desperately wanted to express her opinion to Alberto, to explain in simple terms that they had different views on life. They had been going their separate ways for 3 years now. Since then, her relationship with her former mother-in-law had soured. Why should Ida have dropped everything and rushed to the hospital for someone who had practically become her enemy? He had created a war zone around her and believed he was doing the right thing, disregarding Pancho's interests. But she couldn't say all of that. She couldn't just pass by indifferently, fully understanding that Alberto was going through a difficult period in his life. She simply wanted to support him, encourage him, to find kind, good, and positive words, to explain that this was not the end. She had also experienced difficult moments when she couldn't do without the help of a psychologist. "Ida, I don't understand. Why should you rush, abandon everything, and go to the hospital for your former mother-in-law?" Lino said, puzzled, trying to stop her and make her think carefully. "I'm going to support Alberto. Lino, I can't do it any other way." "I know that Alberto would do the same for me," Ida replied. Lino sighed heavily, making a surprised face, and shrugged. Ida quickly opened her purse, put her phone inside, checked her car keys. "Lino, I probably won't be back. I'll find out everything once I get there. I don't think they'll fire me for this. I can make up for my hours on my day off. Just go." "No need for it," Lino said as he walked out of the office with her. Only when the elevator doors closed, he hit the wall with his fist and cursed. Ida reached the 4th floor. Seeing the sign for the cardiology department, she quickly walked down the hospital corridor, trying to find Alberto as soon as possible. Spotting the familiar silhouette sitting alone on a chair, she quickened her pace. His pale face, as white as a sheet, and unnaturally dark circles under his eyes caught her attention. "Hey, how's Mom?" she exclaimed as she plopped down on the empty chair next to him. "I thought you wouldn't come." "Thank you for coming," Alberto barely managed to say, resting his head on her shoulder and holding her hands in his palms. Ida wanted to object, but there was so much gratitude on his face that she couldn't do it. "Is this because I made your mother leave the apartment?" she dared to ask, fully aware that her own guilt was undoubtedly present in what had happened. "You're not to blame for this, it's my fault." Given recent events, she was already hanging on. "I thought she could handle it when I brought Nemesio home for the first time," Alberto sighed heavily, barely holding back the sting of tears. It was excruciating to restrain himself, knowing that he was the source of all the trouble. "I feel like with the kind of life I've given them, they won't last long. You see how life punished me. When Mom admitted that she had come from you and suggested exchanging apartments, We had a big argument. I just wanted to explain to her that I would never agree to that, and then she grabbed her chest. We called an ambulance. Alberto abruptly fell silent. What do the doctors say? Ida asked, holding his hand, afraid to let go even for a moment. Ida silently praised herself for putting aside all her grievances and coming here. He really needed her support now. As much as she resented these people, they were still family to her, and perhaps the closest ones. Natalia hasn't shown up. I don't think she will anymore. She's become a burden to her. They filed a missing person report. But you know how they search for people here, Alberto grimaced, reflecting the emotions he felt towards the mother of his child. Now the most important thing is for Melania to recover. Everything else is trivial, Ida said. You're right. That's the most important thing now. How is Nemesio? Ida asked, trying to distract him and change the subject. Knowing from experience that there's nothing worse than waiting and dwelling on things. Nemesio is doing fine. Tell me, how is Pancho? Alberto decided to change the topic, releasing her hand. He's doing well. He can read syllables now. What a clever boy. And how about Marcelo? We broke up. Well, I mean, after my failed performance at the nightclub, he simply disappeared. Just think, who needs a woman with a child, and with such an impaired reputation? Ida bitterly smirked. I do, he said without hesitation, taking a deep breath. If only I could go back in time and fix everything. I would do everything the opposite way now. I would never have treated you so cynically. Ida snorted. Perhaps she shouldn't upset him now. But giving him hope made no sense either. Why should she feel sorry for someone who had treated her like a decent scumbag in the past, without even bothering to apologize for his despicable actions? Alberto, if you want to maintain a good relationship, let's not bring up this topic anymore. We can only be friends. I can't give you more than that. Is it because of Nemesio? She asked. It's because of everything. Including Nemesio, she replied. Alberto immediately fell silent, staring at a fixed point, his head hanging low. I understand. No one needs me now with a sick child, he said resentfully. If you understand everything, then let's not talk about it anymore. Otherwise, we'll just argue again. As Melania opened her eyes, she initially couldn't understand where she was. She remembered the unbearable pain in her left side of the chest. Alberto, his hands trembling with anxiety, dialed the emergency number. After that, she wasn't thinking clearly. People in white coats took her blood pressure. Then she faded away somewhere. Thank goodness she was still alive. Melania scanned the unfamiliar walls, realizing she was in the hospital. Suddenly, her son's face appeared before her eyes, the moment he scolded her for intruding into his ex-fiancée's affairs. Without notifying anyone and putting him in an uncomfortable position with Ida. Melania only now realized the irreparable mistake she had made. Perhaps one had to be on the brink of life and death to truly understand it. No. It was too early for her to die. She still needed to seek forgiveness from Ida. For herself, for her wayward son. To visit the church. Pray for all her sins. Start a fresh life. Where there was no room for resentment, revenge, or sorrow. Lino, what are you doing here? Is someone in your family sick? Ida asked, unexpectedly running into him as she exited the hospital. Alberto stayed behind, deciding to wait for the doctor and inquire about Melania's condition, while Ida needed to pick up Pancho from the kindergarten. I was passing by, saw your car parked. Thought I'd stop by and support Alberto. How's Melania? He stammered, trying to justify himself. Ida smiled, imagining the detour Lino took just to be near the hospital. The doctors haven't said much. Alberto stayed to wait. And I need to pick up Pancho. As soon as there's any news, Alberto will call immediately. She looked at him questioningly, showing with her expression that she didn't believe a word he said. If my memory serves me right, Your house is in the opposite direction. Or did you decide to take a city tour for yourself? Lino tilted his head back and laughed heartily, as if reluctant to reveal the real reason. No one can fool you, he admitted. Why do you ask if you've already guessed? Don't make me come up with an excuse. I just don't want you to get sentimental, feel sorry for Alberto, and put an unbearable burden on yourself. Ida shook her head, took out the car keys. Amidst their conversation, she hadn't even noticed they had reached the car. Lino, how long will you continue to watch over me? I'm not a child anymore. I understand everything myself. I know what the common sense is. Occasionally, of course, I do silly things, or else life would be boring and dull. It's impossible to live a perfect life, unforeseen circumstances always happen. But even if I want to help Alberto, I know for sure that I can't handle it. I'm not capable of such sacrifices. You don't need to worry about me. Alberto means nothing to me anymore, she smiled at him, opening the driver's door. Lino's gaze was fixed directly on her. Ida could tell that he was completely satisfied with her response. He smiled and nodded in full agreement. She saw a sincere desire on his face to help her understand herself and to prevent any further foolishness. See you tomorrow, he waved his hand as Ida turned the ignition key and started the car. Goodbye, she replied shortly. Alberto persistently pressed the doorbell, but no one answered. How could he leave the house and forget his keys? He took out his phone from his pocket to call his father. At that moment, the elevator doors opened. First, a stroller rolled out onto the landing, then his father appeared. Alberto was about to ask where Nemesio was, but he remained standing with his mouth open and his eyes wide in astonishment. Natalia stepped out of the elevator with Nemesio in her arms. She had changed significantly. She had lost weight and her face looked tired. There was no trace of her former beauty. Unfamiliar, tired eyes of a young woman who had been beaten down by life stared at him. The three of them stood in silence, looking expectantly at Alberto, while he, rubbing his temples in confusion, closed his eyes, assuming he was being plagued by persistent hallucinations. Cautiously opening his eyes, he hoarsely squeezed out, "Where did you come from? I thought we would never see you and our son again. How could you do this? Abandon a sick child with a complete stranger. And if that kind old lady hadn't found your note with my phone number?" The words flowed out of his mouth like he had rehearsed them. Alberto had longed to express everything he had been thinking about during Natalia's absence. He unleashed his resentment without restraint, trying to hurt and offend her as much as possible, to show what an irresponsible and wayward mother she was. He didn't forget to mention where his eyes had been when he got involved with such a carefree woman. I know that you're deeply hurt by me. I know that there is no forgiveness for me, and I acted like the worst kind of person," Natalia sobbed, holding Nemesio even tighter. "I wanted to start a new life. But I couldn't. I was constantly thinking about Nemesio. I was afraid you would send him to a home for disabled children. Please forgive me. I decided to take him back and go with him to my parents' house in the village. They have their own home. Nemesio will be well there. I will never abandon him again. My parents are waiting for us, Nemesio and me." Alberto's ground and support were literally knocked out from under him. It was a punch to the gut. Natalia kept talking and talking. She looked at him with extinguished eyes, trying to explain how she got tangled up, succumbing to the persuasions of her partner, believing that it was her ticket to a happy future. She wanted a peaceful life, but couldn't achieve it, because she missed her little son so much. Listening to her, Alberto felt an immense relief that instantly turned into fear. The thought of handing Nemesio over to his biological mother squeezed his heart. An unwarranted worry arose within him. His father opened the door with a key. "Come in," he invited everyone into the apartment. "I'll take care of Nemesio, you can talk calmly," he said. They entered the house. Alberto closed the door. Natalia reluctantly handed Nemesio to his grandfather. It was clear to the naked eye that she didn't want to part with him, not even for a second. She began to undress hurriedly. Alberto felt that she was very anxious, worried that he would come to his senses and take their son back, and she would be thrown out onto the street, that he would slam the door in her face and never allow her to see Nemesio again, that he would never forgive her, strip her of her parental rights, and forbid her from coming near him with a gunshot. Deciding not to waste another minute, Natalia firmly said, "Alberto, help me pack Nemesio's things. I bought a ticket for the night train. We're leaving, me and our son. Thank you for everything." Hearing her words, he leaned his back against the door. A feeling of emptiness spread through his chest. His heart tightened and thumped in his heels. If Alberto had heard these words a month ago, he would have joyfully danced and shouted at the top of his lungs. But now, he felt nauseous. Alberto clenched his temples with his hands, desperately trying to figure out that in a short span of time, Natalia would take Nemesio away. And what if her parents didn't love him? What if they mistreated him? Not everyone can close their eyes and calmly take care of a child with disabilities from childhood. "Wait," he barely managed to say. "Where are you rushing?" "You can stay as long as you want." Natalia disregarded Alberto's hesitation and walked into the room, pulling out a pre-prepared cloth bag from her purse. "Alberto, I've already wasted so much time. Believe me, this will be the best solution for all of us. Besides, I've already informed my parents. They're preparing for the arrival of their grandson. My father will be picking us up tomorrow." Ignoring that Alberto was indecisive, Natalia began to pack Petty's things into a trunk. Alberto's gloomy and contemplative face frightened Natalia. Sneaking glances at him, she felt nervous but tried to remain strong, not showing her concern. Alberto approached the window and leaned on the windowsill. Folding his arms across his chest, he watched Natalia's coordinated and confident actions. "Why am I so worried? She's the mother," he reassured himself mentally. "Will you leave an address? I want to visit our son. I can't promise it will be frequent, but I would like to see the conditions in which Nemesio is growing up," Alberto said hoarsely. Then he abruptly turned away towards the window, observing with indifference as the colorful neon signs gradually lit up and lonely passers-by hurried about their business. "Of course. Nemesio and I will always be happy to see you. You're his father. How can I forbid you from meeting your son? You know how I feel about you." Natalia looked at Alberto with gratitude, as if suggesting to him that not everything was lost yet. Perhaps, for the sake of their son, they could mend the enormous crack in their relationship that had formed when their newborn child was diagnosed with some serious illness. "Will you see us off?" she asked uncertainly. "Of course," Alberto replied dryly, trying to help her fasten the lock on the luggage. With relief, he wiped the sweat from her forehead, and Natalia wearily sat astride the overstuffed striped bag. Alberto sank into a chair, bitterly observing the empty room without his son's belongings. "Let's sit for a while," Natalia suggested, realizing that the men had grown attached to Nemesio during this time. Silence fell in the room, with only the heavy sighs and murmurs of the little child audible. The adults remained silent, each lost in their own thoughts. "Thank you for everything," she addressed the dejected grandfather sitting on the couch, trying to uplift him a little. "You and Nemesio can come to us anytime you want. If you need to go to the hospital, know that you have a place to stay. We will be more than happy. He is our grandson. We will miss you." The grandfather spoke without taking his eyes off his grandson. They all entered the elevator together and descended to the ground floor. The grandfather held his grandson in his arms, Natalia pushed the stroller ahead, and Alberto loaded the luggage into the car. Outside, a light drizzle was falling. It was an unpleasant, wet rain. The mood of everyone matched the weather, just as gloomy and sad. The farewell party stood on the platform for a long time, waving to the departing train. They watched the disappearing red lights of the last car in the distance. And only when the train disappeared into the depths of the dark night did they slowly make their way home, feeling that someone was missing around them. Melania's condition improved. She was transferred from the intensive care unit to a regular ward. Visitors were allowed. "Melania, my dear." We were so scared, her husband practically flew into the room. After the ambulance took her away, there was no contact with his wife. They learned about her condition over the phone. Seeing her husband, Melania burst into tears. She had missed him. Seeing Alberto smiling, she anxiously asked, "And where is Nemesio?" In her heart, she held on to the hope that her former daughter-in-law was still with him. The thought that perhaps God had heard her prayers and the children had reconciled brought solace to her heart. The men exchanged glances, as if they were deciding whether to share the latest news or remain silent for now. Natalia took Nemesio. She left with him to her parents, Alberto blurted out almost in one breath. Well. So she showed up. She came to her senses, Melania said thoughtfully. How did Ida react to this news? She unexpectedly asked, recalling how unfairly she had treated her former daughter-in-law. She doesn't know yet. Maybe I'll stop by their place today. Nemesio is gone. Now I have plenty of time, Alberto sighed. Tell me, son. Tell her that I want to apologize, Melania bit her lip, shaking her head. I didn't know what I was doing. Melania sniffled again. Seeing the remorse on her face, Alberto covered her hands with his palms. Mom, everything will be fine. Ida will definitely forgive you. She came to the hospital. She supported me when you were getting a stent, Alberto reassured her. And will she forgive you? Melania's joy was evident as she saw it as possible for her son to build a personal life. Mom, Ida, and I will remain just friends for now. As for our future, time will tell. I won't back down, but I won't push myself on her either. I'm so happy for you, my son. I finally see my son again, not a person who is suffering to live, facing harsh reality, Melania said. What's this? Ida looked at the wedding invitation, where her and Lino's names were clearly written. We've been invited to a wedding? Everyone goes to celebrations as couples. I don't want to go alone. I hope you'll accompany me. I promise there won't be any filming or provocations from me, Lino smiled, raising his hands up as if surrendering to her skeptical gaze. But you know, if your friends see us together, it will start the gossip, laughter, teasing. They'll remember our night at the nightclub, Ida said. Let's tell everyone we are a couple. That will calm everyone down immediately, Lino said without hesitation. Ida looked at her friend in surprise. They had become very close while working in the same team. Everyone at work called them two peas in a pod. But that was only at work. In the evenings, each had their own business. Are you serious? Absolutely. You're a smart girl. You can sense how I feel about you. Maybe we can blur the lines between us and try being together? You'll make me breakfast in the mornings, and I, in turn, promise to brew and serve coffee in bed. Lino began listing the pros of married life, curling his fingers on his hand. Maybe it should be the other way around. I'll make the coffee, and you'll handle breakfast? Ida retorted. If you insist, then I agree. Let it be the other way around. It's a tempting proposal. I need to think about it, Ida playfully replied, seriously considering his offer for the first time. As luck would have it, at the wedding, they found themselves at the same table as Alberto and Viola, Lino's ex-wife. It might have been a coincidence, or maybe someone deliberately wanted to have a laugh and sat them at the same table. Ida tried not to pay attention to her ex-husband, especially to Viola, who was ready to drill a massive hole in her forehead. And Lino aimed to pulverize him and leave not a single tiny particle behind. The celebration was gaining ground. The guests were having fun, participating in contests, and dancing. Lino was constantly by Aida's side. At the table, everyone laughed, talked about random topics. No one bothered anyone. Everyone was enjoying themselves, taking turns congratulating the newlyweds. Gradually, Viola stopped staring at Ida. The atmosphere became relaxed. Lino whispered in Aida's ears so she wouldn't get bored. He needed to go outside, smoke, and have a chat with a friend. Ida waved her hand, whispering back for him not to rush. She left the table and decided to take a walk to the restroom. So, Lino dragged her along to get revenge? It's so amusing to watch them. He's so attentive and considerate. If you didn't know the whole story, you'd think he's genuinely in love with Ida. Upon hearing Lino's name, Ida paused, hesitating to open the door and enter the restroom. Female curiosity got the better of her. As she heard more, her face grew darker and darker. Viola laughed with an artificial, clearly forced laughter. When he sent out the video of their time together at the nightclub, I immediately realized it was all done specifically for me and Alberto. He knew perfectly well that the video would be sent to me as his revenge for catching us with Alberto. By getting involved with Ida, he kills two birds with one stone. He'll take revenge on both me and Alberto. Viola talked about it as if it were some funny comedy where the main characters had known each other since childhood and hardly ever encountered concepts like morality and ethics. It's his own way of getting back at both of us. I hoped it would be a one-time act on his part. But Lino didn't stop. He decided to rub it in my face and show me vividly what kind of husband I lost. He knew I was invited to the wedding. He wanted to play on my nerves, but he miscalculated. I'll do it myself. He thinks I didn't notice how furious he was when Alberto asked me for a slow dance. To avoid attracting attention, Ida sat on a bench. The audibility was excellent, as if invisible conversationalists were talking behind her back, discussing her personal life, picking at the still healing wound on her body, and laughing at how men use her to achieve their goals. What if our Lino is in love? Have you ever thought about that? I'm sure he's doing this to spite me. My relationship with Alberto was a monstrous mistake. I didn't intend to divorce my husband for him. It was some kind of obsession. A waterfall of inexplicable emotions. The passionate infatuation that disappeared without a trace after a month. And Lino still loves me. He'll never admit it, but it's true. You can't fool me. I know him better than anyone else. Ida just happened to be there at the right time, in the right place. It's a pity for her. First, her husband left her, and now Lino chose her as an instrument of revenge. But she's to blame herself. Alberto never loved her. He only married her because she got pregnant. He never hid that. Life, however, punished him severely. One of his numerous mistresses gave birth to a disabled son. I've seen him. If a person is faint-hearted, they better not to look at him. Ida grew tired of eavesdropping. She urgently wanted to see the faces of the girls who ruthlessly tore her apart. She swung open the door. Viola's friend, a short, plump blonde with a voluptuous bust, faked a smile and, taken by surprise, turned on the tap, finally trying to break away from gossip and wash her hands. Ida looked at the two friends with disgust. Viola turned around as if she felt that the one they were just mocking had entered. She smirked insincerely. "Are you having fun?" She couldn't come up with anything smarter and asked the ordinary question. Viola was struggling. An opportunity arose to sting, to remind that Lino was her husband. He had a hard time dealing with their divorce, and perhaps he still hadn't recovered, hadn't come to his senses. "Thank you, I'm fine," Ida replied, scanning the girls from head to toe as if they were sitting at the same table for the first time. The friends exchanged conspiratorial glances, trying to figure out if Ida had overheard their conversation or not. They smiled sweetly at her and, quietly whispering, walked into the hallway. Ida approached the mirror. She looked at her reflection and smiled at herself. With her cold hands, she adjusted her slightly disheveled hair. Waving her hand across her face, she started replaying the accidentally overheard conversation in her mind. Her first instinct was to follow Viola, corner Lino against the wall, and ask him directly, without any hesitation, a rhetorical question. Why? What for? But after some thought, she realized that an answer wouldn't be necessary. Everything was already clear. Deciding not to say anything to anyone, she would leave quietly, unnoticed, without saying goodbye. Perhaps it would be impolite, but at least she would do it with dignity and self-respect. She opened her clutch, took out her coat, and inconspicuously made her way out of the venue. Away from those people with whom she would never again entertain with. Ida stepped outside. Lino stood with his back to her, engrossed in conversation with his friend. Turning in the opposite direction, she briskly crossed the road to catch a taxi and get home as soon as possible. Taking a short respite, Ida tried to set aside all her grievances and engage her mind. Persistent courting by Lino came to mind. Who is he? A macho or a schemer who wants to get back at his tormentors in the same way? She asked herself the same question over and over again. The phone was ringing persistently. Lino called endlessly. There were a few calls from Alberto, her mother-in-law, and her mother. She needed to make a decision before they spread the news throughout the town. Hello, she answered Lino's incoming call. She really wanted to be rude or directly tell him that the most he could expect was friendship. But hearing his dissatisfied grumbling about her sudden disappearance on the other end of the line, she decided to delay it a bit. Sorry, I have a headache. Yes, I'm already home. No, I don't need anything. I'm going to bed. Yes, I took a pill. Goodbye. Before Lino could finish, she interrupted the conversation and ended the call. She returned the missed calls from her parents, reassuring them. She had to lie that her phone unexpectedly died. Ida turned the mobile phone in her hands, put it on silent mode. Then Lino messaged her. I'm coming to your place. If you don't open the door for me, I'll spend the night outside. Biting her lower lip, Ida stared at the blank screen of her phone for a minute before suddenly losing her inner calm and bursting into tears. Even with bitter experience behind her, she didn't know how to handle herself, once again finding herself as someone else's plaything in skillful hands. The persistent ringing at the front door made her jump. Wiping away her tears, Ida waved her hands in front of her face to dry them and, taking her time, went to open the door. Lino stood on the threshold, his dissatisfied face mixed with hurt and confusion. Are you okay? He asked, concerned, upon seeing her tear-stained face. Don't pay attention to it, Ida replied, averting her gaze toward the kitchen entrance. Did something happen? Lino whispered, as if afraid that someone other than her might hear him. Ida smirked, raising her eyebrows in surprise. Are you even asking? Why did you drag me to this wedding? Did you decide to rub our exes' noses in it with my help? And I, like a fool, hoped that you actually had feelings for me. Lino followed her into the kitchen, closing the door just in case. He raised his hands, gesturing for her to stop, and immediately began speaking. Ida, let's talk calmly. I don't know what you were told. Just know this. I don't care about Viola. I don't care about Alberto. I don't care about whoever tells me things about you. I'm guilty of one thing before you. I uploaded our dance video from the nightclub. Believe me, I regretted it many times. How could I have known that I would think about you constantly? Every minute, I want to see your eyes, kiss you, hold you. I can't go a day without you. I miss you. I worry about you. Lino looked at Aida's pale, almost snow-white face. Tears appeared in her eyes again as she vented all her negative emotions, not hiding her frustration. Tell me honestly, do you still love Viola? Why didn't you tell me that Viola and Alberto were lovers? She continued, swallowing a lump in her throat. Ida felt the physical tension in Lino. He straightened up and looked at her as if she had said something utterly foolish. He smirked as if she had just made another silly remark. Who told you such nonsense? How can I love her? It's as absurd as if I knew about your love for Alberto. That couple is worth each other. I would be infinitely happy if that couple left us alone. Lino abruptly fell silent. He thought for a moment, then continued, I'm sure she had a hand in us sitting at the same table. It's funny to hear Viola telling everyone that I still love her. Fine, I got you, Ida interrupted him before he could finish. It's time for you to go home. I'm tired and I want to sleep. But you promised to think about it. I want to live with you, Lino reminded her. Lino, no. There can be no talk of that. I'm not sure if you really want it. You need to figure yourself out. Perhaps you still love Viola but are afraid to admit it to yourself. Ida tried to speak calmly, but the memories that flooded her made her voice break again. Barely holding herself together to avoid crying, she pointed at the door. I don't want to leave you in such a mood. Think whatever you want, but I won't go. Lino stood up, demonstratively left the kitchen, walked into the living room, and settled on the couch. When you stayed over at my place, I undressed you and put you to bed. I didn't throw you out onto the street. Now it's your turn to show your hospitality. Once I fall asleep, you can take care of me. I won't mind if you undress me and cover me with a sheet or something. He closed his eyes. I'll call the police, Ida threatened. Why? Are you worried about the couch? Note that I'm not claiming your double bed, Lino replied. At that moment, a long and insistent doorbell rang. I'll open it. Sleep vanished from Lino's mind. Pushing Ida to the background, he quickly walked to the hallway and opened the door. Alberto stood on the threshold. Sorry for the late visit, but Ida wasn't answering my calls. He began to excuse himself in a flurry, trying to push Lino aside and enter the apartment. However, Lino didn't budge. We're doing fine. You can go home peacefully. My beloved girl has a headache. She's feeling much better now, and there's someone to take care of her. And please tell Viola not to spout her filthy mouth. He leaned in and whispered something to Alberto's ear. By the way, you two look good together. But I won't let Ida to be with you, not even in your dreams. Alberto told everything he wanted to, and Lino closed the door, immediately locking it. Looking at the closed door in front of him, Alberto had nothing else to do but turn back and return to the restaurant. Alberto was experiencing irritation, anger, hatred towards Lino. Emotions surged outward. There was a desire to explode at someone, to vent the negativity, to change the situation, regain peace, comfort, restore emotional balance. The crowd was dancing, having fun. Viola and her friend sat at a table, alone and proud. How are you doing? Alberto took a bottle of wine in his hands and filled the glasses. Let's drink to the happiness of the newlyweds. He proposed a toast, emptying his glass. Alberto, do you know where Lino is? Viola asked. He's with Ida. At her place. Ida left unexpectedly, and Lino, like a loyal man, chased after her. By the way, your ex-husband asked me to tell you to keep your tongue in check from now on. Alberto looked at Viola with undisguised arrogance. He poured himself more wine and drank in silence. Aren't you afraid of losing control? Getting drunk? Tomorrow, at the best case, you'll have a headache, and at worst, you'll find yourself in another unpleasant situation. Viola moved closer to him. Through his shirt, he felt playful fingers on his chest, skillfully inching towards the top button. He remembered the turbulent, fleeting romance. It ended as unexpectedly as it began. Alberto intercepted her hand, preventing playful hints of seclusion. Distracting himself from dark thoughts was impossible. His mood deteriorated at the speed of a rocket, burning everything in its path and exposing his emotional wound. Thoughts kept returning to his former apartment and the scene he witnessed just an hour ago. Stop it. There are people around, he said, removing her hands. You seem agitated. Disturbed, Viola moved away from Alberto. Slightly tipsy, Alberto lazily slouched in his chair. Ignoring the girls, he took a toothpick and started picking at his teeth, removing the snack stuck between them. Warmth spread inside him from the consumed wine. He felt relief. He smiled at Viola. Help me win my wife back, he said in a muffled voice, contorting his face as if those words scratched his tongue. How? Lino is hovering around your ex. I hope to get him drunk and take him home today. As you can see, my plan didn't work, Viola shrugged. She fiddled with the earring on her right ear, staring at the dark liquid at the bottom of her glass. You're a smart woman. You know how to seduce men. I know from experience that if you want, you can make anything happen. You'll win back your husband, and I'll win back my wife. Everyone will be happy and satisfied. Especially our children. Doesn't your daughter miss her dad? His words hit the mark. They struck harshly and ruthlessly at the most painful and vulnerable spot. She misses him a lot, Viola uttered pensively. She smiled bitterly. Bitter memories stirred her soul. Viola regretted 1,000 times when she succumbed to her feelings and had a passionate affair with Alberto. Sitting at the same table and seeing Lino next to Ida was unbearably difficult. Viola held herself together all evening, rejoicing for the newlyweds, while her soul cried out against the glaring injustice. Her ex-husband did everything to turn the evening into a nightmare in real life. Together, we are strong. You yourself said that Lino still loves you. Alberto's caring voice pulled him away from his memories. Viola looked thoughtfully at her former lover. Lino will never forgive me, she sighed heavily. Never say never, Alberto smirked. He tossed the toothpick onto the table. You can talk to Ida. Explain that you're at fault, that you made a mistake. But you're deeply interested in keeping the family together. Our daughter needs her biological father. I don't need to teach you. And if a conversation doesn't work, we can compromise Lino. Surprise him and get pregnant with the second child. I've tried. It doesn't work. The phone on the table vibrated abruptly, displaying a photo of Lino on the screen. Viola picked up the mobile, showing it to Alberto. The hunter becomes the prey, she exclaimed, pressing the green button and answering the incoming call. Hello. What happened there? Okay, I'm coming, Viola ended the call. I took our daughter to her grandmother's. They had a disagreement or something. Maria called Lino in tears. She asked him to pick her up and take her home to her mom. I have to go, Viola said, getting up from the table. She pecked Alberto on the cheek, said goodbye, and her friend accompanied her. They approached the coat check. Viola handed over her ticket. I hope you have the sense to stop by the pharmacy on the way? Her friend whispered, ensuring no one could hear them. Why? Viola replied indifferently, calling a taxi and quickly fastening the jacket. To buy a male enhancement product. You do want to win back Lino, don't you? She explained, looking around to make sure no one was overhearing their conversation. Viola paused for a moment, wide-eyed. Thinking on her feet, she couldn't believe she was being drawn into a crazy adventure, pushed to reclaim what was hers and seek revenge on those who hurt her. She smiled, shaking her head, gesturing that she would never agree to such a thing. She kissed her friend once again, thanking her for the support and understanding. She stepped outside, got into a taxi, and told the driver her address. After a brief hesitation, she asked him to stop the car near the nearest pharmacy. Viola hurriedly opened the front door. Lino was standing at the threshold. Maria darted into the apartment and immediately began complaining in a resentful tone. Mama, don't send me to Grandma anymore. We just don't understand each other. It's good that Dad agreed to pick me up, Maria grumbled, recalling how her grandmother scolded her for not wanting to read a bedtime story aloud. Dad, come in, she addressed him, noticing his hesitation. It's getting late, Mommy. Maybe some other time, Lino said, smiling, grabbing the door handle. He glanced at Viola. By the time they arrived, she had already changed into a short robe, exposing her long, slender legs. Lino, where are you rushing off to? Maria misses you. Spend some time with your child. She'll be thrilled, Viola scolded him, crossing her arms on her chest, trying to reach his rationality. I made coffee. Your favorite. Maria, tell Daddy to stay with us. He's always in a hurry, she added, stretching her lips into a satisfied smile. Lino hesitated, pondering. Viola approached him, opened the wardrobe. Asserting her authority as the host, she reached out to take his jacket. Lino sighed heavily. If Ida finds out that I'm having coffee here at night, I don't think she'd be pleased. He shifted his gaze to his daughter. Maria pouted her lips, twisting her face. She turned away, trying to make her father change his mind and stay with them. Viola didn't show any signs, but inside, she was panicking. She realized that the money spent at the pharmacy had been wasted. Why did she agree to this adventure? She spent more time explaining to the pharmacist which medication she needed. She shook her head in dissatisfaction. Lino's words struck her ears painfully and made her heart shrink. Well, if Ida means more to you than your daughter, then go. She will worry. Our daughter will manage. 5 minutes of conversation with her will be enough. The important thing is for Ida to be satisfied, she told him. What does that have to do with anything? Don't turn Maria against me. Otherwise, I'll have to have a serious talk with her and explain the reason for our divorce. I'm going home now. It's already too late. Maria needs to rest, not drink coffee. Lino waved his hand at Maria, opened the door, and left the apartment. Viola turned the key, shielding her treacherous tears from her daughter, and closed her eyes. It seems like your dad has fallen in love, she said, sniffing loudly, her voice hoarse, nodding towards the bathroom door. Let's go wash up and go to bed. 3 years passed. Lino, hi. I'm going on a business trip for a week. Maria absolutely refuses to stay with her grandmother. Do you think Ida would mind if she stayed with you? No problem. Pancho would be more than happy to share some of his responsibilities with Maria. And don't worry about Ida, she's very understanding. Go ahead and leave for a whole month. Ida has been on maternity leave for the past 2 years, taking care of their child. Lino finally got what he wanted and managed to make Ida his wife. He proved that he was the only and best candidate for her heart. They got married, and 1.5 years ago, Ida gave birth to their son. Everyone adores the little one. Their older children spoiled him, sometimes allowing him things that make the parents rolling their eyes. He took advantage of his position and got away with it. Pancho, being the oldest, often pointed out Maria's shortcomings. At first, she would get upset and even cry. Ida had to have many conversations with her son, explaining and interpreting obvious things. Now they have become friends. Pancho always stands up for her and takes her side in any conflict, no matter how minor, against their stepbrother. Viola couldn't come to terms with the fact that she had lost Lino for good. She tried to separate them, even resorting to magical actions. But when their son was born, she stepped back. She met a man. She fell in love again. However, she didn't get married this time because he turned out to be happily married. But Viola isn't upset. She hopes that her beloved will come to his senses, divorce his wife, and give her an engagement ring. Alberto didn't mourn for long either. He remarried. Although even this marriage was now falling apart at the seams. His young wife had filed for divorce twice, trying to reason with her husband. The main reason was that she wants to have a child, while Alberto was categorically against it. He was afraid that the child might have psychological or physical developmental issues. Nemesio was living in the countryside. Alberto visited him along with his parents, who had become attached to their grandson in such a short time. They didn't visit with Pancho too often. Melania was still angry at Ida, thinking that she acted foolishly by bringing a stranger into their apartment and treating her son so cruelly. Natalia got married in the countryside. The neighbor's wife passed away, leaving him with 2 charming children. Without much thought, he invited Natalia to live with him. And she fully immersed herself in raising 3 children, considering herself a mother to multiple kids. Alberto got upset when he heard how he was addressing Lino, telling him that he only has one dad. Calling his stepfather dad was a display of disrespect, especially towards his biological father. Pancho silently agrees. He didn't want to hurt anyone. He couldn't tell Alberto that his relationship with Lino had become much closer and more familial than with his biological father. The woman was shocked when she saw her husband kissing his mistress. If only he knew how fate would punish him, he would have never.